I never thought that at my own grandson's birthday, I would be thrown out by my own family. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't just a simple misunderstanding, it was a deliberate act. When I walked into the party, smiling, expecting to be greeted with warm hugs and laughter, the last thing I could have imagined was what would unfold. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, planning a special day to celebrate my grandson Tommy's 10th birthday. I baked his favorite cake, picked out a gift I knew he'd love, and arranged the party to be perfect. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I could feel the tension in the air. The decorations were up, the guests were milling around, and there, in the corner, was my daughter-in-law Lydia. She was talking to someone, her voice sharp and clipped, but it was her expression that made my heart sink. The warmth I had hoped to feel wasn't there. I made my way over to where Tommy was playing with his friends, his bright eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma!" he shouted, running over to give me a hug. For a moment, everything felt right. But that feeling didn't last. As I bent down to embrace my little Tommy, Lydia was watching me from across the room. And when our eyes met, her expression shifted. A cold smile spread across her face, and then she turned away, as if I were a mere inconvenience. At first, I thought nothing of it. I was just happy to be with my family, especially Tommy. I walked over to the table where everyone was sitting, prepared to enjoy the food I had made and celebrate the day with the ones I loved. But as soon as I sat down, Lydia stood up abruptly and walked over to the entrance. I looked up, confused, and that's when it happened. "You need to leave," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I froze, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "What?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. But Lydia didn't hesitate. "You heard me. Leave." "Now," she snapped, her eyes cold as ice. For a moment, I thought maybe there was a mistake, maybe I had misheard her. But when I looked around, no one said a word. My son, Andrew, was sitting at the table, with his head down, avoiding my gaze. Tommy, looking confused and upset, was standing next to me, holding his birthday gift. Lydia's eyes never wavered as she continued, "I don't want you here. You're causing trouble. You're not welcome at our celebration." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I couldn't understand what was happening. How had everything gone so wrong? I had been nothing but supportive of this family, giving love and care whenever they needed it. I'd helped raise Andrew, made him the man he was today. I had helped Lydia settle into the family, treated her as my own daughter. And this is how they repay me? By treating me like a stranger in my own home? I stood up slowly, trying to hold myself together, but my heart was breaking. "I don't understand, Lydia. What have I done?" I asked, my voice shaking. She looked at me with disdain, as though I were a burden she couldn't wait to get rid of. "You've done nothing but take," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I've had enough. Andrew and I don't need you here, cluttering up everything." My son, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. "Mom, I think Lydia's right," he said quietly. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt my chest tighten, the sting of betrayal cutting deep. My own son was siding with her? How had things gotten to this point? "Andrew, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been here for you, all these years. I've loved you, supported you, and this is how you treat me." But Andrew avoided my gaze, his hands folded in his lap. Lydia turned to the security guard standing by the door, who had been watching the whole exchange, and said sharply, "Take her out." I couldn't believe it. The guard walked up to me, his expression blank, and said, "I'm sorry. You'll have to leave." I looked around the room, my mind racing, but no one was offering help. No one spoke up. My heart ached as I realized that I was truly alone. Slowly, I turned and walked out of the room, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. As I stood in the hallway, trying to compose myself, I could hear the laughter and music from the party behind me. It was as if they had already forgotten I was ever there. But I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own family, not without a fight. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I promised myself that I would find a way to make things right. The betrayal stung deeply, but it also fueled a fire within me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The shock of being thrown out of my own grandson's birthday party had left me feeling like I was walking in a fog. I stepped out into the cold evening air, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The world around me seemed muted, like I was disconnected from everything I had known. The sound of the party, the laughter, and music still echoed in my ears, but I felt like an outsider now. My hands trembled as I gripped my purse tightly, but it wasn't just the cold that made me shiver, it was the overwhelming realization of betrayal. I had always believed that family was supposed to stick together. But now, it seemed I was just an inconvenience, something to be pushed aside when I wasn't needed anymore. I walked slowly down the driveway, my heart heavy with each step. I couldn't even bring myself to look back at the house. For a brief moment, I thought about getting in my car and driving away, but where would I go? This was the house I had helped build, the home I had spent years creating memories in. And now, I was being cast out like I was nothing. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. I refused to let them see me weak. I had always been the strong one in the family, the one who kept things together, who made sure everyone had what they needed. But now, everything felt shattered. I wasn't sure how long I stood there on the sidewalk, lost in my thoughts, before I realized I had to do something. I couldn't just let Lydia and Andrew get away with this. I had to find a way to make them see the truth. But for now, I needed to leave. I needed space to think and figure out my next move. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring out through the windshield. The engine hummed quietly, but the sound felt so distant, like it belonged to someone else. What had I done wrong? Why had they treated me this way? I had always been there for them, always put my family first. But now, it felt like everything I had done was erased in a single moment. I couldn't understand it. I thought back to all the years I had spent helping raise Andrew, all the sacrifices I had made to support him and Lydia. When Andrew was young, I was there every step of the way. I was the one who stayed up late helping him with his homework. I was the one who took care of him when he was sick. And when he got married, I welcomed Lydia into the family with open arms. I tried to be the best mother-in-law I could be. But now, it seemed like all of that meant nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been taken advantage of, used for my kindness, and then discarded when I wasn't needed anymore. I started the car and drove away from the house. My mind was spinning with thoughts, but I kept telling myself that I would get through this. I had to. I had worked too hard for too many years to let this betrayal break me. But as I drove through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. This wasn't just about a birthday party or a single moment of cruelty. This was about something much deeper, something that had been building for years. Lydia had always been distant, but lately, she had been colder than ever. I had chalked it up to her adjusting to life with Andrew, but now I wondered if there was more to it. Maybe she had always seen me as a threat, someone standing in the way of her plans. I needed to figure out what was really going on. I had to find out what Lydia and Andrew were hiding. But how? I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't just let this go. As I turned a corner and headed down a street I had driven many times before, I thought about my options. I could confront them, but I wasn't sure that would help. If anything, it would probably make things worse. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to gather information, to understand what was really going on behind the scenes. The thought of confronting Lydia and Andrew filled me with a sense of dread, but I also felt a spark of determination. I had been a mother, a grandmother, a wife, and I had been strong through it all. Now, I would have to be strong again. But this time, I wouldn't just sit back and let them walk all over me. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I would find it. I had to. The road ahead wasn't clear, but I was done being passive. I was done letting Lydia and Andrew make me feel small. From now on, I would fight for my place in this family. I just needed time to think, to gather my strength. I looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the reflection of the woman I once knew, strong, confident, capable. And I realized something, I was still that woman. No matter what Lydia and Andrew tried to do, I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. Not now. Not ever. The days following the incident were a blur. I spent most of my time in the quiet of my small apartment, the empty rooms echoing with the silence that had replaced the chaos of my once bustling family. My mind replayed the events of that day over and over, each detail cutting deeper than the last. I couldn't shake the image of Lydia's cold expression, the way she had dismissed me without a second thought. It hurt more than I expected it to. I had always been there for Andrew and the family. I had spent my life supporting them, putting their needs above mine. And yet, here I was, cast aside like I was nothing. My hands trembled as I wiped the kitchen counter, the mundane task grounding me in the moment, though my thoughts were still far away. It wasn't just that Lydia had humiliated me at the party, it was the way she had done it so effortlessly, with no remorse, as if I meant nothing to her. It was the cold indifference that cut the deepest. I had always known that Lydia wasn't the warmest person. She had never been the type to shower me with affection, but I never expected this level of cruelty. I thought maybe it was just a phase, that once she got used to being part of the family, things would change. But now, I realized how wrong I was. I was just a pawn in her game, a means to an end. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been used, and the worst part was that I hadn't even seen it coming. I had always been so focused on keeping the family together, on making sure everyone was happy, that I had ignored the subtle signs. Now, the truth was clear. My mind raced as I thought about the events leading up to that day. I remembered the small, seemingly innocent moments when things felt off. Lydia's coldness had been there from the beginning, but I had brushed it off, telling myself that she was just adjusting. But now, it was obvious that she had been planning this for a long time. The question kept haunting me, why? Why had Lydia turned on me like this? Was it just about the house? The inheritance? Or was it something deeper, something I hadn't realized until now? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. The thought of letting Lydia and Andrew get away with this made my blood boil. I had spent too many years keeping the peace, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of the family. But now, I realized that I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me. I had to take control of my own life again. I couldn't let Lydia's manipulation define who I was. I needed to find a way to expose the truth, to make sure they knew that I wasn't as easy to push around as they thought. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts, trying to figure out my next move. I knew I had to be careful. If I confronted them too soon, it would only make things worse. But I couldn't stay silent forever. I needed to act. The thought of confronting Lydia directly filled me with dread, but I knew I couldn't avoid it. I had to be strategic, make sure I had all the information before I took any action. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of thinking they could just walk all over me. My resolve grew stronger with each passing day. I would find a way to expose them. I wasn't sure how, but I would. The betrayal was still raw, but it also sparked something inside me, a determination to fight back. I spent more time going through old documents, reviewing conversations, trying to piece together what Lydia and Andrew were up to. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was something I was missing. There had to be more to this than just the party, than just the house. I wasn't sure yet, but I was going to find out. The days turned into weeks, and with each day that passed, my sense of purpose grew. I wasn't just going to let Lydia and Andrew win. I wasn't going to let them destroy my family without a fight. Slowly, I began to put together a plan. I knew it wouldn't be easy. It wasn't going to be as simple as confronting them and demanding answers. But I was ready. I was done being passive, done being the quiet one who always kept her head down. I had been through too much to let this go. I would get the truth, no matter what it took. The days after that moment felt like a blur, but the anger and hurt never left. I could feel the sting of Lydia's words echoing in my mind. It wasn't just that she had humiliated me, it was the way she had treated me as though I were nothing. She didn't care about the years I had spent raising Andrew, about the sacrifices I had made for this family. To her, I was just an obstacle, something to be discarded when it was convenient. I couldn't stand the thought of her getting away with it, of them thinking they could just throw me out like I didn't matter. So, I started making plans. It wasn't something I could do immediately, I had to be patient. I couldn't let them see me coming. I needed to be smart. The first thing I did was reach out to some of my old friends. People who had known Andrew since he was a child, people who had known me long before Lydia came into our lives. They would be my eyes and ears. They could help me figure out exactly what Lydia and Andrew were up to, especially now that I was no longer a part of their little world. I needed to gather information to make sure I had everything I needed before I confronted them. I spent the next few weeks carefully watching, listening, and learning. I stayed quiet, kept my distance, but I wasn't idle. Every conversation I overheard, every piece of information I gathered, brought me closer to the truth. What I discovered wasn't just shocking, it was disturbing. Lydia was more manipulative than I had ever realized. It wasn't just about the house or the inheritance, it was about control. She had always been calculating, but now I understood how far she would go to get what she wanted. And Andrew, my own son, he was so wrapped up in her that he couldn't see what she was doing. Or maybe he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let them take everything I had worked for. I had spent years building a life with Noel, raising Andrew, making this house a home. And now, just because Lydia had decided I wasn't worth her time anymore, they thought they could take it all away. No, I wouldn't let that happen. But I had to be careful. I had to pick my moment. I couldn't storm in there and demand answers. Lydia would just shut me down, and Andrew would back her up. I had to be subtle, patient. I began to piece together a plan that would expose their true intentions, something that would force Andrew to see his wife for who she really was. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to make Lydia believe that I was done, that I had given up. It would be the only way to catch her off guard. I had to show them that I was weak, that I was no longer a threat. That would be my greatest strength. One afternoon, I went over to the house to pick up some old papers I had left behind. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me an excuse to be there. When I walked in, Lydia was in the living room, talking to someone on the phone. She looked up briefly, and for a moment, her expression softened. Then, just as quickly, she looked away, her eyes cold again. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice as sharp as ever. I smiled, a calm, controlled smile. "Just needed to grab a few things," I said, keeping my tone even. She didn't respond, just waved a hand as if I was an inconvenience. I went to the desk where I had left some of my things, but the whole time, I could feel her eyes on me. She didn't say anything, just watched me. It made my skin crawl, the way she was watching me like I was something she could dispose of at any moment. But I didn't let it show. I kept my movement slow, deliberate, as though I wasn't a threat. As I grabbed my papers and turned to leave, I caught her watching me again, her face tight with disdain. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "if you weren't so pathetic, maybe I'd actually feel sorry for you." I didn't flinch. "I'm not pathetic, Lydia," I said quietly. "I'm just smarter than you think." Her eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that cold, calculating look I had come to despise. "Don't kid yourself," she replied, her tone condescending. "You've already lost." But as I walked out the door, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had just planted the seed of doubt in her mind, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as easy to push around as she thought. I knew this was only the beginning. It wasn't going to be easy. But I was ready to take back what was mine. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It had been a week since that conversation with Lydia, and the weight of what she had said still lingered in the back of my mind. I had gone over it in my head countless times, replaying her words, trying to make sense of the cruelty she had shown me. I knew she was calculating, but this was beyond anything I had imagined. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, biding her time until she could make her move. But what really hurt the most was the way Andrew had stood by, silent. My son, the boy I had raised, the man I had supported for all these years, had chosen to stay silent while his wife humiliated me. I couldn't understand it. I thought I had done everything for him. I had loved him, I had been there for him through everything. And yet, here I was, abandoned. The thought of it was too much to bear. I had to do something about it. I couldn't let Lydia and Andrew get away with this. But I knew I had to play it smart. I had spent my life keeping the peace in this family, swallowing my pride, and never raising my voice. But now, I realized I couldn't keep quiet anymore. If I wanted to take back control of my life, I had to act. I started making plans, slowly at first, trying to figure out my next move. I knew I couldn't confront them directly, not yet. They would only deny everything and make me look like the crazy one. No, I needed something more. I needed proof. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much Lydia had manipulated Andrew. She had turned him into someone I didn't recognize. The man I had raised was gone, replaced by a version of himself who cared more about pleasing his wife than standing up for what was right. But I wouldn't let him off the hook. I had a few tricks up my sleeve. First, I started reaching out to people who knew Lydia and Andrew. People who had seen their relationship up close, people who had witnessed the cracks that had started to form. I wasn't sure who I could trust, but I had to start somewhere. As I gathered information, I began to see the pattern. Lydia had been slowly isolating Andrew from his family, pulling him further away with every passing day. She had done it so subtly, so quietly, that no one had noticed. But I had seen it. I knew what was happening. The more I pieced it all together, the angrier I became. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Andrew, too. He didn't even realize he was being manipulated, but I could see it. And it broke my heart. But I couldn't focus on that right now. I had to stay focused on the bigger picture. I knew I had to be patient. Lydia thought I was weak, that I was just going to let her walk all over me. She thought I was too old to fight back. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I had worked for. I had spent years building this life, and I wasn't going to let her take it away. I spent the next few days quietly observing. I didn't reach out to Andrew. I didn't confront Lydia. I just watched. And as I watched, I began to understand how deeply ingrained Lydia's manipulation had become. She wasn't just after the house. She wasn't just after the money. She wanted control. She wanted everything. I had always known she was selfish, but this was something else entirely. It was a cold, calculating greed that ran deep in her veins. She had no regard for the people she had hurt along the way. The more I observed, the more I knew I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to expose her, to make her face the consequences of her actions. I couldn't let her continue to manipulate Andrew, and I couldn't let her keep pushing me out of this family. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew I couldn't let things go on like this. The time had come to take control of my life again. I wasn't going to be anyone's doormat any longer. I had spent enough years being quiet, being the peacemaker. Now, it was time for me to fight for what was mine. I wasn't going to let Lydia have her way. I wasn't going to let Andrew stay blind to the truth. It was time for them to see who they were really dealing with. The following days were filled with tension, but I didn't let it show. I had spent years being the one who held the family together, the one who kept the peace. But now, things had changed. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore, and I wasn't going to be passive while Lydia and Andrew destroyed everything I had worked for. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me any longer. My plan was in motion, but I had to be patient. I couldn't rush into things. I had to make sure I was a step ahead, that I had all the pieces before making my next move. My first step was to gather the evidence I needed. I couldn't just go to them and demand answers, they would only deny everything and play innocent. No, I needed something solid, something that would prove Lydia's manipulation once and for all. So, I began reaching out to people who had seen the cracks in their relationship, people who had witnessed the way Lydia controlled Andrew. Slowly, I started putting the pieces together. I spoke with Andrew's old friends, people who had known him long before Lydia came into the picture. They told me things that I had never known, things that made my stomach turn. It was like Lydia had been working on this for years, slowly pulling Andrew away from the family, making him rely on her for everything. He didn't even realize it, but she had isolated him. And that made me even angrier. I had always been there for Andrew. I had raised him, cared for him, and done everything I could to support him. And yet, Lydia had managed to turn him into someone else, someone who didn't care about the people who had always been there for him. I couldn't let that happen. I had to save him, even if he didn't know he needed saving. As the days passed, I kept gathering information, building my case against Lydia. I had to make sure I had enough evidence to expose her for what she really was. But I also had to be careful. I didn't want to make a move too soon and risk giving her the chance to cover her tracks. I knew Lydia was smart, and she had probably seen this coming. But I wasn't going to back down. I was done being the quiet one, the one who always kept the peace. It was time for me to fight for what was mine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had allowed Lydia and Andrew to walk all over me. I had been so focused on keeping the family together, on making sure everyone was happy, that I had ignored the signs. But now, it was too late for regrets. I had to fix this. I had to take back control. My plan was starting to take shape. I knew I couldn't confront Lydia directly, not yet. I had to make sure she was trapped, that she had no way of escaping. I needed her to make a mistake, to reveal her true intentions. I wasn't going to rush into it. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when she would think she had won. That was when I would strike. I had already begun planting seeds of doubt in Andrew's mind. He had started to question Lydia's behavior, though he didn't yet realize the extent of her manipulation. I had to keep it up, keep pushing him to see the truth. It wasn't going to be easy. Lydia was smart, and she had a way of making Andrew believe everything she said. But I had something she didn't have: patience. I had spent my whole life being patient. I had learned to wait for the right moment, to bide my time. And now, that time was coming. I wasn't going to rush it. I wasn't going to make a mistake. But I also wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. I was done being passive. I was done being the one who always kept the peace. It was time to make my move. But first, I needed to make sure Andrew knew the truth. I couldn't save him if he didn't see what Lydia was doing to him. So, I began to plant the seeds of doubt more carefully. I reminded him of the things he used to enjoy, the things he used to love before Lydia came into the picture. Slowly, I began to see cracks in his facade. He was starting to question her, starting to realize that maybe he had been too blind to see what had been happening. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give me hope. I wasn't going to let Lydia win. Not now. Not ever. I had spent my life fighting for my family, for the people I loved. And I wasn't going to let a manipulative woman take it all away. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. It was only a matter of time before I had everything in place. The pieces were coming together slowly, but I knew I had to act carefully. I had already seen how far Lydia would go to manipulate Andrew, to control every part of his life, including me. What shocked me most was how easy it had been for her to convince him that I was the problem, that I was a burden. I had spent my whole life supporting him, raising him with love and patience, and this was how he repaid me. The realization stung, but I knew I had to keep my emotions in check. This wasn't about my feelings anymore. It was about taking control of my own life again. The more I watched Lydia, the more I saw through her act. She was cold, calculating, and used Andrew's love for her as a weapon against him. It was clear now that she was the one pulling all the strings. I had spent enough time gathering information, enough time playing the quiet observer. It was time to expose her. I had started planting little seeds in Andrew's mind, little doubts about Lydia's behavior. I reminded him of the things he used to love, the things he used to do before Lydia became the center of his world. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start opening his eyes. He was beginning to see her for what she really was. Slowly, he was starting to pull away from her, but I knew that I had to keep pushing him, keep showing him the truth without pushing him too hard. I couldn't afford to lose him. Not again. As much as I wanted to storm into their house and confront them both, I knew that would be a mistake. Lydia was smart, and if I rushed in without thinking, I would just be playing into her hands. I had to be more strategic. The key was patience. I had learned long ago that in situations like this, patience was everything. I waited for the right moment. And when it came, I was ready. It was a Saturday afternoon when I got the call. Andrew asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. My heart skipped a beat. It had been a while since we had spent time together, just the two of us. I agreed without hesitation, hoping that this would be the moment when everything changed. When I arrived at the cafe, Andrew was already there, sitting at a corner table. His face looked different, like he had something on his mind. He stood up as soon as I walked in, a small smile on his face. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. I could feel it. The tension was thick in the air, and I could tell he was struggling with something. I didn't say anything at first, just waited for him to speak. After a moment, he looked at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Mom," he began again, his voice low. I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything. About Lydia. About us." My breath caught in my throat. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to say. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused, running his hand through his hair as if he didn't know where to start. "I know things have been difficult," he said. "I've been distant, and I didn't realize how much it hurt you. I've been so focused on Lydia, on trying to make everything work with her, that I've pushed you away." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had always known that he was distant, but to hear him say it out loud made it real. It wasn't just my imagination. He had been shutting me out, and I had been too afraid to admit it. "I've been so blind," he continued, his voice cracking. "I didn't see what was happening. I didn't see how she was changing me, how she was isolating me from everyone." My heart ached for him. He was finally seeing the truth, but I knew this wasn't going to be easy for him. "Andrew," I said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I know you've been struggling. But you have to understand, Lydia has been manipulating you. She has been using you to get what she wants, and she doesn't care about you, about us. All she cares about is controlling you." He looked down at the table, his face pale. "I know," he whispered. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe it." I squeezed his hand gently. "It's not too late," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "You can still make things right. You can still fix this." The words hung in the air between us. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, but I also knew that this wasn't going to be easy for him. Lydia had been a part of his life for so long, and breaking away from her wasn't something he could do overnight. But this was the first step. And I wasn't going to let him back down. We sat there for a long time, talking through everything. I listened as he explained the guilt he had been carrying, the way he had let Lydia control him, and the way he felt like he had lost himself in the process. It was a painful conversation, but it was also a healing one. By the time we finished, I could see the change in him. He wasn't the same person who had walked in that day. He was starting to see things clearly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The road ahead would be difficult, but I knew that together, we could make it through. I wasn't going to give up on my son. Not now. Not ever. The next few days felt like a slow-burning fire, each moment passing with the weight of what I had just set in motion. After that conversation with Andrew, I could feel the shift, the subtle yet powerful change that had begun in him. It wasn't immediate, and I knew it wouldn't be easy, but there was hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel completely alone. But I also knew the hardest part was still ahead. Lydia wasn't just going to let this go. She was crafty, and if she felt her control slipping, she would do everything she could to regain it. I didn't want to make any mistakes. The time for waiting was over. I had to act. The first step was to continue building trust with Andrew, to show him that I wasn't just trying to tear him away from Lydia. I wanted him to see that what I had been saying wasn't about me trying to control him, it was about him seeing the truth. And that truth wasn't pretty. Slowly, I started talking to him more, reminding him of the times when things had been better, when he was happy, when he had been closer to the people who truly cared about him. I wasn't forcing him, but I was gently guiding him, letting him come to his own conclusions. I could tell he was conflicted. The guilt weighed heavily on him, and I could see it in his eyes. But he was also starting to question things that he had never questioned before. I didn't expect it to happen overnight. I didn't expect him to just walk away from Lydia without a second thought. But every little bit of progress felt like a victory. And I knew that if I kept going, if I kept being patient, eventually he would see what I saw. What he saw in Lydia was an illusion, a carefully crafted image of a woman who pretended to be caring and loving, but in reality, she was just using him. But I wasn't going to let him fall back into that trap. I wasn't going to stand by and watch him lose everything again. The hardest part was still the way Lydia was controlling him. She was isolating him from the family, keeping him close so that he couldn't see what was really happening. I knew that I had to break through that wall, but I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. I needed to get through to Andrew, but I also needed someone who could see the truth, someone who had been there before Lydia came into the picture. I decided to reach out to Ruth, my sister. She had always been a voice of reason in our family, and I knew that if anyone could help me, it was her. She had known Andrew since he was a child, and she understood him in a way that I couldn't. Ruth was hesitant at first, unsure about getting involved, but after I explained everything, she agreed to help. Together, we began making subtle moves to make Andrew see what he was really dealing with. Ruth and I started organizing family gatherings, casual dinners where we could bring Andrew and let him see how things used to be. We didn't push him, we didn't confront him, we just let him see that there was still a place for him, a family who loved him unconditionally. But Lydia was always there, always watching, always trying to control the narrative. She began to notice that Andrew was pulling away, just slightly, but enough to make her nervous. I could see it in her eyes the next time we were all together. She was on edge, watching every move we made, trying to figure out what we were doing. I knew she had to be feeling the pressure. But I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. I needed to give Andrew more time. He wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. And I didn't want to rush him into something he wasn't prepared for. But I could see the change in him, the small signs that he was starting to realize the truth. It was just a matter of time. One evening, I invited Andrew over for dinner. We were sitting at the kitchen table, eating the same comfort food I used to make for him when he was growing up. As we talked, I could tell he was more open than he had been in a while. His defenses were down, and for the first time in a long time, he was allowing himself to feel something other than guilt. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice low. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to fix things with Lydia, but another part of me feels like I'm losing myself. I looked at him, my heart aching for him. I know it's hard, Andrew, I said gently. But you have to realize that sometimes, letting go is the best thing you can do for yourself. You've been carrying so much for so long, trying to make things work when they weren't meant to. You deserve happiness, not manipulation. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes fixed on his plate. I waited, giving him the space to think. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. What if I'm making a mistake? He asked. What if I'm throwing everything away? You're not throwing anything away, I said, my voice steady. You're just choosing to take control of your own life. And that's not a mistake. He didn't say anything else, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. I knew that he was finally starting to understand what I had been trying to tell him all along. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with difficult choices and painful moments. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same path. He was starting to see Lydia for who she really was, and I was ready to help him navigate through it all. Together, we were going to get through this. And I wasn't going to let anything stand in our way. It had been weeks since that dinner, and the silence that followed hung over everything. But it wasn't a silence of defeat, it was one of change. Andrew had finally started to see through the web that Lydia had spun, and it was like a light had turned on in his eyes. Slowly, he was pulling away from her, questioning everything she had told him, everything she had made him believe. I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and pride as I watched him make small but significant strides. He was waking up, and I was there to guide him through it. It wasn't going to be easy. Lydia wasn't going to give up without a fight. She had always been the type to control the situation, to manipulate the narrative to make herself the victim. But I knew that this time, things were different. Andrew was different. As the days passed, I noticed the subtle changes in him. He wasn't as quick to defend Lydia, wasn't as eager to please her. It was like a fog was lifting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was seeing my son clearly again. But I also knew that I couldn't let my guard down. Lydia was dangerous when she was cornered. I had seen it in the way she had treated me, and I knew she wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to keep control of Andrew. The stakes were higher now. We weren't just talking about a family dispute, this was about breaking free from a toxic relationship that had been built on lies and manipulation. I had to be there for Andrew, to make sure he didn't go back to her. I didn't want to pressure him, but I knew he needed to hear the truth. And this time, I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. I had spent years protecting him, trying to shield him from the harsh realities of the world. But now, he needed to face those truths head-on. He needed to see that Lydia wasn't the woman he thought she was. She wasn't the person who had his best interests at heart. She was someone who had used him, manipulated him, and tried to tear apart the family that had always been there for him. One evening, after dinner, I sat down with Andrew. We had talked about his future, about what he wanted, but tonight, I needed to be blunt. Andrew, I said softly, looking him in the eyes. I need you to understand something. Lydia doesn't love you. Not the way you deserve. He looked away, his face clouded with doubt. What do you mean? He asked, his voice uncertain. You've seen how she treats you, how she's isolated you from everyone who cares about you. She's using you, Andrew. And if you keep allowing her to control your life, you'll lose everything that matters. I could see the struggle in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it. But I also saw something else, a flicker of realization, a glimmer of truth starting to break through. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, I continued, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm telling you because I love you. And I want you to have a chance at a real life, not one where you're manipulated and used. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might dismiss it, might defend her again. But then, he looked at me, his expression softening. I don't know what to do, Mom, he said quietly. I feel so lost. My heart broke for him. I could see the pain in his eyes, the confusion that had been brewing inside him for so long. But I knew this was the turning point. It's okay to be confused, I said gently. It's okay to feel lost. But you don't have to stay lost. You have a family who loves you, who wants the best for you. You just have to be brave enough to see it. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the floor as he processed everything I had said. I didn't push him. I knew that he needed time to think, to come to terms with everything. But I also knew that he was starting to make his own decisions, starting to see the world for what it was. And that was enough. The next few days were filled with uncertainty, but there was also a sense of hope. I could see the small changes in Andrew. He was starting to talk to people again, reconnecting with old friends, making the first steps toward reclaiming his independence. Lydia had no idea what was coming. She thought she had him under control, but she didn't realize that Andrew was beginning to take back his life. It wasn't going to be easy. Lydia wouldn't give up without a fight. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. Andrew was finally seeing the truth. He was finally ready to take control of his own life, and I would be there every step of the way to help him. It wasn't the end yet, but it was the beginning of something new. For the first time in years, I felt like we had a chance. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from us.